35 years before Bruce Lee fighting.
Bolo Yeung has finally said something about Bruce Lee. It was 35 years before Bruce Lee fought. Not only is what he says shocking, it's also bad. Bruce Lee. After that came John Coffin. Then who? The world has been curious for years about the strange events that led to Bruce's sudden death, but not many people have been brave enough to look past the news stories to see the damage it caused. Bruce Lee's brother, who is still alive, wants to know what really happened. Soon, one of the last men who trained with Bruce Lee will speak out and tell a truth that could make everything different. Who will come next after John Beth? No one. Why? Let's look at where I got lucky. Not only Bruce's death but also the damage he caused was that his worst tragedy. Get ready for a surprise that no one saw coming. These papers about Bruce Lee's death are in this envelope. Official records from the court's investigation into how he died. How famously close Bruce Lee and Bolo Yeung were as friends. Bruce Lee did more than just fight. He was a legend, known for his lightning-fast moves, the highest level of accuracy, and a mindset that made martial arts into an art form. But even heroes need good enemies. Bolo Yeung, the huge powerful man who is known for being tough and strong, walks in. On the set of Enter the Dragon, the movie that cemented Bruce's place in movie history, their paths crossed. But they were connected in more ways than one. Bolo Yeung, whose real name is Yang Shi, was a martial arts winner before he ever worked on a movie. He wasn't just the usual bad guy on screen. He had a background in bodybuilding, and a lot of respect for traditional martial arts. He was a dedicated fighter who was admired for how strong he was. Bruce, who was always seeing things clearly, saw more in Bolo than just a huge enemy. He saw a man who knew what martial arts were all about, of power, speed and grace. Their training meetings were really something special going on behind the scenes. Bolo remembered that Bruce was very fast, faster than anyone else he had ever seen. But Bruce's unwavering work ethic was what struck him the most, not just how fast he was. Bruce was always pushing himself to be better, which improved his trade in ways that no one could have imagined. Many people in the business were just there to make money. They fought, practiced, and put each other to the test, building a bond not only through fighting, but also through respect for the practice of martial arts. Bruce directly asked Bolo to be in Enter the Dragon, because he knew that Bolo's big scary face would add to the movie's scary mood. Even though their famous fight scene didn't make it into the final film, it was clear that they got along. It became clear as they trained. Bruce Lee was the faster and more quick fighter, but Bolo was the stronger and more powerful one. To Bruce's young, but as their relationship grew stronger, Bolo saw something that no one else did. Bruce did more than just fight. He had a huge load on his shoulders that would only get bigger as time went on. Behind the scenes of Bruce Lee's life, the real man, Bruce Lee was an invincible figure to everyone. He was a martial arts legend, whose name was known all over the world, and whose ideas changed how people thought about martial arts. Bruce was known for his powerful kicks and hard punches, but Bruce was also a complicated man with problems, and a personal life that was very different from the bright lights of Hollywood. Bruce was a husband and father at home. The parts that he played there were just as important as the ones he played in public. She went to his martial arts school in Seattle, where he met Linda Lee Caldwell. Their link was made right away. They got married in 1964. After having 2 kids, Brandon and Shannon, they built a life and a family together. At first glance, it looked like everything was going well. Bruce was quickly becoming famous all over the world, thanks to movies like The Big Boss and Fist of Fury, which changed the way movies were made. But even though Bruce loved his family very much, the stress of being famous began to weaken his personal life. Bruce wasn't just an actor, he was a force that wanted to change how Asians were presented in theater. He gave his whole life to this purpose, and as he became famous, more and more people needed his time and energy. Even though Bruce loved Linda, his marriage started to suffer as he became more focused on his ideas for martial arts and movies. Bruce was obsessed with being perfect, and he trained all the time. Linda saw how this started to hurt him. He worked hard all the time, often staying up late to write, do study and improve his methods. He was under a lot of physical stress, and even though his body looked like it could take anything, it was starting to show signs of wear. Bruce's weight went up and down, and he had no energy. Even worse, he started getting terrible headaches, which he firmly ignored. But Bruce was slowly falling apart in more ways than one. He was physically tired. The mental stress was just as bad. He was said to have been seeing other women, especially Betty Ting Pei, who is a rising star in Hong Kong's film business. Many people thought Bruce and Betty's relationship was just friendship, but Bruce's closest friends and family felt a stronger emotional pull. This made Bruce's public and private lives more and more stressful, and Linda was stuck in the middle, having to deal with the pain of a marriage that was being closely watched. The stress of Bruce Lee's fame, family problems, and personal problems made his life go downhill in ways that no one could see. He looked unbeatable to everyone else, but behind closed doors, the stress was getting too much for him to handle. Beryl Ting Pei was a woman who loved Bruce Lee. Betty Ting Pei's name has always been in the background of Bruce Lee's story. She is a figure that people are still trying to figure out. Most people only knew Bruce as a brave movie hero, but Betty was one of the few who saw him as more than that. She saw a side of Bruce that not many people did, a man who was stressed out by his fame and the attention it brought. Betty was an actress in Hong Kong, who was making her way up in the movie business on her own. She wasn't just another pretty girl who was drawn to Bruce. She had a job and goals she wanted to reach. The fire and drive in Bruce, on the other hand, drew her in. She wasn't the first person to fall in love with him, but she became one of the most important people in his life, especially in his last few years. Their relationship was more than just that of a star and fan. Bruce would go to Betty's place to get away from the stress of becoming famous. Bruce could be himself around Betty, because she didn't expect anything from him, and didn't have any cameras rolling. He was after all a man who rarely stopped. He was always fighting, not only other people, but also his own inner problems. Betty was his safe place, where he could recover and get away from the stress of the world for a while. But people have always had different ideas about what their relationship is really like. Some say they were just friends, while others say there was more to it. But one thing is certain. Betty was very important in Bruce's life, helping him feel better when everything else around him was awful. But after Bruce died, Betty was more than just a friend. She became a puzzle. The woman who was with him in his last moments will always be linked to his sad death, the last day and Bruce Lee's last moments. Bruce Lee's life was already very busy, so July 20th, 1973, was just another day. He had plans to meet with people, one last time voicing Enter the Dragon, his big breakout movie that was already solidifying his reputation as a martial arts legend. Also, he was working hard on making Game of Death, which had become his favorite project. But there were hints that something wasn't quite right that morning. Bruce had been saying for weeks that he had terrible headaches. He put in a lot of effort, even though he was tired, and his weight had dropped a lot. Doctors told him to slow down and take better care of himself, but Bruce, being the stubborn person that he is, didn't listen. He kept training and working even though his body was telling him to rest. After meeting with director Raymond Chow, Bruce went to the apartment of Betty Ting Pei. Bruce was sick, so they didn't get to talk about some writing ideas for Game of Death. He told Betty about his headache, and she gave him a painkiller to make him feel better. He laid down to rest so that he could get better before the next meeting. She checked on him after hours, and saw that Bruce still hadn't woken up. He wasn't responding, and fear quickly set in. Bruce Lee was declared dead, even though people tried to bring him back to life. Brain edema, a sudden swelling of the brain, was found to be the official reason. It was most likely caused by a reaction to the painkiller he had taken. The turn of events was shocking and sad. The world was shocked, especially since Bruce was only 32 years old, and seemed to be in great health. Bruce Lee, who seemed unbeatable, and often broke the rules of what was physically possible, was gone in an instant. Theories about poisoning, curses or hidden strikes started to spread right away, but this was the cold truth. Bruce was a man who always pushed himself to the edge. In the end, it was his body that gave out. Bolo Yeung's thoughts on the death of Bruce Lee. I couldn't believe it when I heard that Bruce Lee had died on July 20th, 1973. Bruce was gone. He had trained with, sparred with, and loved Bruce very much. It was almost too much for Bolo to handle, since he had seen and dealt with many problems in the martial arts world over the course of his life. Not only was Bruce a fighter, but he was also a natural force of nature. Bruce was strong, focused and never gave up. How could someone like that just disappear? Bolo had spent a lot of time in the gym with Bruce, and had always admired how hard he worked at his craft. He had never seen someone work so hard and never give up. Bruce wasn't someone who knew what rest meant. He had the hardest work ethic I've ever seen, and he never quit training, always getting better. Without the cameras, Bruce was unbeatable to Bolo, not just in form but also in mind and spirit. But in the days after Bruce's death, Bolo couldn't get rid of the thought that Bruce might not have been able to win. Everyone was making wild guesses about what killed Bruce, but Bolo kept quiet. He wasn't a believer in the crazy conspiracy ideas that said there was foul play, or a secret killing. Bolo had his own idea, which was based on the fact that Bruce had been under a lot of stress his whole life. Bruce didn't just fight people in the ring or on film sets. He also fought against the pressures of fame, expectations, and the never-ending need to be great, and sometimes even the most careful warriors aren't ready for how much stress can hurt them. Bolo started to notice signs that other people had missed when he looked back. Bruce was more tired than just physically worn out. Both his emotions and his mind were worn out. He was overwhelmed by his need to be perfect, and his constant need to prove himself. Bolo saw this, but he didn't know how much it made Bruce feel at the time. Though Bruce was tired, had headaches, and lost weight, he ignored them, because he was always ready to fight. His body finally gave out. The heartbreak you forgot. Where did Betty Ting Pei go? People became very interested in Betty Ting Pei's life after Bruce Lee died. She got a lot of attention from the media, and Bruce's sad death will always be linked to her name. While everyone was sad about Bruce's death, not many people thought about how hard it was on the woman who was with him in his last moments. Betty never asked to be noticed. Before Bruce died, she was a well-known and admired actress in Hong Kong, but after Bruce died, everything changed. People looked at her, the person who was with Bruce when he died. She wasn't just Betty Ting Pei anymore. When Bruce Lee died, she was known as the woman who was with him. This term had a lot of weight that not many people could understand. The news made a big deal out of her relationship with Bruce, portraying her as everything from a sad lover to a woman who knew something bad about his death. A lot of people said bad things about her, and she couldn't get away from the memory of that day, no matter how hard she tried to move on with her job. People watched her every move, wondering what happened that fateful afternoon, and guessing what part she played in Bruce's death. But Betty never changed her story. She said that Bruce had only come to her apartment to rest, that he had taken a headache pill, and that he never woke up. Even though it was a simple fact, there was a lot of talk about it. In the end, Betty was left not only sad about the death of a friend, but also with the emotional and mental weight of a life that would never be the same again, because of the tragedy. Last but not least, Bolo Yeung speaks up. Bolo Yeung didn't say anything about Bruce Lee's death for many years. Lee was a close friend, and a famous martial artist. The world around him is filled with conspiracy ideas. There were rumors of poisoning, hidden murders and curses, and each idea was more shocking than the last. But Bolo never spoke out, even though he had trained with Bruce, sparred with him, and seen how driven he was. His thoughts were kept secret, maybe because he knew Bruce's story had more to it than people were ready to hear. But Bolo's truth was not what anyone had thought it would be when he finally spoke out. He didn't pay attention to the crazy ideas about dirty play or secret enemies. In its place, Bolo told something much easier and more difficult. He told them that Bruce had killed Betty Ting Pei in a way, not by anything harsh, but by how they felt. Bruce left behind a heavy unspoken load when he let Betty into his crazy world, and let her see his struggles and stress. Bolo thought that Bruce's worst tragedy wasn't his death, but the mental scars he left on those closest to him. Betty carried that weight with her whole life, because she was always connected to Bruce's last moments. It was always there, even when she tried to move on after he died. It felt good to hear what Bolo said. Bruce won many famous physical fights, but what people didn't see was the emotional toll he took. The real cost of his legacy was the fight inside of him. Bruce Lee's unexpected death left a deep mark on not only martial arts, but also on the lives of those who knew him best. Many people around the world were sad about his death,
but few knew how it made people like Bolo Yeung and Betty Ting Pei feel. Bruce's biggest fights were the ones he fought inside, away from the public eye. The real tragedy wasn't his death, but the mental damage he caused that will last a lifetime in the lives of those who loved him.